listing every historical inaccuracy in Call of Duty Vanguard. There's a lot of them, so prepare yourself and let's do this. The game starts in the year 1945 during the capture of Hamburg, which unit an allied task force called Vanguard. All of the members of this team are Special Forces soldiers from different nationalities and have been brought together to find intel on the secret Project Phoenix. There are straightaways inaccuracies here, as Task Force Vanguard never existed and would not even make sense to exist in such a late stage of World War II, with it being literal days before Germany's surrender. It also doesn't make sense why the Soviets would give up one of their best snipers for this operation while they are currently attacking Berlin. And one of these members is a pilot who specializes in flying planes, not performing secret ground operations. Here we see the DRG Class 24 locomotive, but it clearly does not have any tender to hold coal. Hamburg is currently in the middle of an air raid, so a blackout should be in place during night to reduce visibility for bombers, meaning none of the lights should be on in these houses.
Yeah, mate, what's the bloody story?
We don't quite know.
You mean the SO fucking E doesn't quite know?
You know what? I'm gonna go pull the brakes.
All we have is a name. Phoenix.
That scene just showed that these highly skilled soldiers were sent in by the SOE to retrieve intel on something that they themselves don't even know the importance of. This unpreparedness could easily put their lives on the line for potentially nothing, which further adds to the unrealistic nature of this operation. Here Wade somehow has a Japanese Type 100 SMG, and we can also find Japanese Type 11s on the train. Once off the train, you can find an MG42, which you can jump around, slide, and hipfire with, which would have been pretty much impossible, as the MG42 is a light machine gun that is very heavy and has uncontrollable recoil when not mounted. Also, it has a post-war MG3 box magazine on it. Many of these weapons have dual drum mags and holographic sights, despite them not existing during World War II. This is not how attack dogs work. They are supposed to disable their targets so that a soldier can then shoot them, but in the game, they give you one little bite and you're dead. Throughout the level, we see the German soldiers using revolving shotguns. This shotgun did actually exist in real life and was called the Becker revolving shotgun, but only about 100 or so were ever produced, so it should not nearly be as prevalent as it is in the game. While in the submarine, you get hit by a stun grenade, which doesn't match up, as stun grenades were not developed or used until the 1960s. This SS officer should be wearing the shoulder boards that correspond with his rank of Untersturmführer. The next mission brings us to Normandy during the British D-Day airborne Operation Tonga, where we partake in the Battle of the Merville Gun Battery. The first problem here is that we play as Sergeant Kingsley, a character who was inspired by a real British soldier by the name of Sidney Cornell. Although Cornell was the first black paratrooper who fought in D-Day, he did not take part in the assault on the Merville Battery. This is a patch of the 1st Allied Airborne Army, which was only formed by August 1944, a full 2 months after this mission. The British paratroopers do not have leg bags, when in fact they are most experienced in jumping with it. The jump master has 8 basic commands that they have to say, but here he only says 3. The amount of aircraft shot down, spotlights, anti-aircraft guns and sheer destruction is extremely dramatized here, as only 2 planes were actually lost during the real operation. British paratroopers did not have a reserve parachute, as the War Office saw them as too expensive, so they should not have them here. This British paratrooper somehow has an American M1 Garand. Really? A fully automatic 88mm flat gun? Okay, developers. The Stahlhelm insignia should not illustrate the German national colours. German High Command mandated against this in 1940. This German soldier has SMG ammo pouches, despite him wielding a rifle. Many of the German enemies are wearing heavy trench coats, despite it being summer. Once on the ground, we meet with Richard Webb, whose real-life counterpart is a soldier named Terence Otway. Terence Otway was the commander of the battalion in charge of attacking the Merville Battery, but in the game, Cornell's character is put as the leader instead. This literally makes no sense, as again, Cornell was never in this operation. If this wasn't bad enough, the game then depicts Otway's character as a coward, by making him not want to push the attack only for Kingsley to convince him. Terence Otway was not a coward, as he was the one who bravely launched the attack on the Merville Battery, even though his battalion was heavily lacking weapons and manpower, with him only having 150 out of his 700 paratroopers, due to most of them going missing during the chaotic parachuting. Most of the paratroopers have corporal stripes on their arms, despite having private, lieutenant and other ranks on their names. It was still nighttime when the real attack on the Merville Battery began. Also, the real Merville Battery was never located by a cliff. The gliders that took part in the real Operation Tonga are missing in the game. This shell-shocked soldier magically musters up the strength to go up over and continue fighting by simply receiving some encouraging words from our character.
This is it! This is the end for me! I'm good and dead already! We've got a job to do! Get out there! Yes, Sarge!
Here the Germans perform a charge, which would be completely pointless as they are already in an elevated position with plenty of cover. These armoured troop transports were not used in the actual battle. These battery guns should have been Czechoslovakian World War I era 100mm field howitzers. The real-life account of the assault on the Merville battery said that the paratroopers had to make do with gammon grenades and plastic explosives, not termite grenades. There was no offshore artillery to bombard the casements, since it was only a contingency measure should the paratroopers fail to capture the battery by 5 AM.
Even then, Richter was easy to read. Uniform said high rank, no combat medals.
No, he is clearly wearing the ribbon of a Knight's Cross of the Iron's Cross medal on his uniform. The next mission takes us to the city of Stalingrad, just before the German assault in 1942. Here our character's brother refers to these petrobombs as
Molotovs.
The term Molotov cocktail was invented by Finnish soldiers during the Winter War to mock the Soviet Foreign Minister Václav Molotov. So unless this guy is secretly an enemy of the Soviet state, then this doesn't make sense. When you consider the fact that the Red Army was fully aware of the incoming battle, then it doesn't match up that most of these people are casually sitting around. At this point in time, the German 6th Army was on the outskirts of Stalingrad and was chasing the Soviet 62nd and 64th Armies, which had retreated back into the city. It should be all hands on deck. All civilians should be getting enlisted, forming into militias or building fortifications and digging trenches. We can overhear conversations of citizens, and some of them state that they are considering leaving the city. This would not have been possible, as Stalin refused to allow citizens in Stalingrad to be evacuated before the beginning of the military assault, because he believed that having them in the city would provide motivation to the Red Army to fight harder. Here we see a Soviet T-34-85, which is a tank that didn't enter service until 1944, making it impossible to be featured here in 1942. Many of these soldiers are wearing shoulder pads, which were not introduced to the Soviet uniform until 1943. This particular soldier is also wearing medals, which are from the complete wrong period. This one appears to be a Jubilee medal, which was handed out in 1968, and this one seems to be the one rewarded to soldiers for the capture of Berlin in 1945. The attacking bomber planes appear to be German He-177s, when in reality He-111 bombers were used. These German bombs somehow land horizontally, when they should be landing vertically. There seems to be a severe lack in anti-aircraft guns, which should be shooting down some of these bombers. When running across the roofs, we get attacked by German Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers. Firstly, these fighters should not be flying this low. Secondly, when we investigate the underbelly of one of these planes, which you can get a closer look at in the trailer for this game, we can see an absolute array of inaccuracies. We see that it has the O-side radiator from the BNR variant. The outboard fuel tanks were used for the R variant. It has 20mm cannons that were used against tanks and was only featured on the D variant, later renamed to the G variant. The D variant radiators are missing. It has no engine intake. The siren here wasn't used together with the outboard fuel tank or the gun pods. And then we have the bomb, which would not have been used at the same time as the gun pods. And finally, it features an arrestor hook used for landing on aircraft carriers, which was equipped on the experimental Navy C variant of the Ju-87. So it seems like they just slapped together as many details from as many different variants of the Stuka as possible, and thus created an engineering nightmare that would most probably be too heavy to fly properly.
Hey! Get back inside, Mädchen!
Keep in mind that our character is still wearing her Soviet uniform, so it would be much more realistic for this German soldier to immediately shoot her on sight, or at the very least capture her. Speaking of which, there is no way that German soldiers would be able to be seen this far within the city in less than a day since the start of the battle. It took the Wehrmacht 2 or 3 weeks of brutal house-to-house fighting before they reached anywhere near downtown Stalingrad. Here it seems that an entire platoon of German soldiers are protecting these prisoners, when realistically they would have just executed them. The troops themselves also seem to be Luftwaffe paratroopers, which doesn't make sense as only one company of paratroopers, which is about 100 men, actually saw combat in Stalingrad, and none were even in the initial attack on the city. The following level brings us to the naval battle of Midway in 1942. This guy is wearing a US Army uniform with the patch of an Army Sergeant, when he should be wearing the US Navy insignia and uniform instead. He also for some reason has a US Army Combat Infantry badge with a sword instead of a rifle on it. And this Army Air Force patch has the Airborne tab on the wrong end. Here we see an Army Air Force poster, but the US Air Force did not become its own branch until after World War II. Also, we are on a US Navy carrier, so it would be much more realistic for this to be a poster of the US Navy aviation branch instead. The US cruisers are missing all of their turrets. There's 100-pound bombs on the wings of the aircraft, despite the fact that the bombers weren't equipped with them in real life due to range and performance issues. The game depicts all the American squadrons launching at the same time in a coordinated wave of aircraft that wipe out the Japanese fleet swiftly. This was not the case, as the squadrons actually all launched at different times and in some cases different directions, catching the Japanese off guard by accident and sheer luck. The torpedo bombers should not be flying this high. SPD Dauntless pilots actually opened their canopy when performing a dive, as the different air temperature would cause fog on the glass when it was closed, and thus limit visibility. Your fighters find the Japanese fleet in less than 4 minutes, when in reality it took much longer. During the dive run, the rear gunner is calling out the altitude, despite there being no altitude meter back there. The Japanese ships would not be this close together. In reality they are quite far apart to have room to maneuver and avoid torpedoes. There is no way that an American SPD Dauntless dive bomber with a bomb node attached would be able to outperform and outspeed Japanese A6M0 fighters. When the American bombers assaulted the enemy carriers, they were largely uncontested, as the Japanese Zeros were not high enough to fight them because they were too busy fighting off torpedo planes that attacked earlier, meaning there should not be this many Zeros attacking us in the game. There was no rain or thunderstorms at the Battle of Midway. Your aircraft also magically reloads its bombs mid-air, because you somehow have enough bombs to perform a second dive run. By looking at the structure and letters displayed on the carriers, we can tell that the one we take off from is the USS Enterprise. The first Japanese carrier we attack is the Soryu, and the second one is the Kage. This is in reverse order of what happened in real life, as the Kage was attacked before the Soryu. The game also tells us that we are in Bombing Squadron 6, which was a real squadron part of the air group on the Enterprise. These squadrons went on to sink the Japanese carriers Kage and Akagi, but as just mentioned, we destroyed a Soryu and Kage in the game, which does not match up as the Soryu was actually attacked by bombers from the USS Yorktown, not the Enterprise. The following level takes place during the Battle of Numa Numa Trail on Bougainville Island in November 1943. What did he think he was going to achieve? Here we use a Japanese Type 97 grenade, but for them to explode, you need to not only pull the pin, but also press in the firing pin on the top, which our character fails to do. Again we see the revolving shotgun. As mentioned earlier, this was strictly a German weapon and was exceptionally rare.
Do you speak Japanese?
Oh yes, Mr. Japanese soldier who for some reason knows perfect English. I am sure that our American pilot character is fluent in the language of Japanese. This American ambush is portrayed poorly. All attacking forces should have each targeted a Japanese soldier and all shot at the same time. They also should not have come out of cover while the enemy is still firing at them. Here this soldier tells us that they are part of the 93rd Infantry Division. This unit was one of 2 African American combat divisions who served during World War II. The problems here lay in the fact that the 93rd Division was mainly tasked with labour and security missions on the Guadalcanal, so they did not see much combat, and the division didn't even arrive on Bougainville Island until March 1944, making it impossible for them to be here in November 1943 as the game depicts. He states that the mission was to rescue the 2 pilots, but then they immediately consider not saving them because they'll be dead weight. Booker is carrying a rifle cartridge belt despite him being a submachine gunner. Howard is using the flamethrower at point blank range and in the wrong setting. The weapon had a range of 20 to 40 meters and was supposed to be used to clear bunkers and destroy fortifications. Booker mentions that they are here to assist the 23rd Division. The dates again do not match because the 23rd only arrived in January 1944 to replace the 3rd Marine Division at Cape Torquena. Also, the 23rd Division was the only American division that was never actually called by its number, with it being referred to by its name of Americal Division. Throughout the level we find Japanese soldiers wielding German STG-44s, which is both misplaced and anachronistic as the STG was not distributed until 1944. Here Howard gets shot through the back, which means that the bullet would also have gone through the fuel tank and render the flamethrower useless as the fuel would leak. The flamethrower did not have this much fuel, with it only being able to consistently fire for 7 seconds before it had to be refueled. Here we see a Type 41 mounted cannon, which although was used by Japanese forces in World War II due to its lightweight and maneuverability, it would be more realistic to have an anti-aircraft gun here instead, since it is located right next to an airfield. This grenade would not explode because the safety lever on the side was not released. Here we see American 76mm Sherman tanks. These tanks were only used in late 1944 and were specifically designed to destroy heavily armoured German tanks such as Tigers or Panthers, not lightweight Japanese tanks which were renowned for having terrible armour. Flying an enemy's plane would be an assured way of getting shot down by your own allies. Once again we use a German weapon in the Pacific, and this time it's an MG42 that happens to have unlimited ammo. The Sherman was one of the greatest and most armoured medium tanks in World War II, so they should not all be getting destroyed so easily by some lightweight Japanese tanks like they are here. Also yes, this Sherman legit just tried to shoot down a Japanese fighter with its cannon. This wounded soldier is wearing M1943 boots, which would be impossible considering that the Model 43 uniform set was still undergoing testing in Italy during this time. These soldiers should be wearing a helmet while in direct combat, not garrison caps. The next mission takes us back to Stalingrad towards the end of the battle in January of 1943. Our character in the Stalingrad missions is based on a real Soviet sniper named Lyudmila Pavlichenko, but unfortunately the only two similarities between these two people is that they are both Soviet, female, highly skilled snipers, as Pavlichenko never even fought in the Battle of Stalingrad as the game depicts. It is far too quiet during this opening sniper fight. There should definitely be gunshots and bombs going off in the background. Here we can find an AS-44, an early Soviet assault rifle that was not designed until 1944. Oh look, it's the T-34-85 tank again. Still a year too early to be featured here though. Our character somehow reloads his pistol with one hand. Keep in mind that at this time in the battle, the German forces were already completely encircled and on the verge of defeat, so it makes no sense for there to be so many German troops and no Soviet soldiers in sight. These Jägermortar heavily armoured soldiers never existed in real life. When you consider that the Battle of Stalingrad was the single bloodiest conflict in history that involved thousands of troops performing brutal close-quarter house-to-house fighting, with upwards of 19,000 people being killed per day, then it really doesn't make sense to why it's so empty around here. Seriously, this is the Barmily Fountain, which was infamous for representing the destruction and carnage of the fighting in Stalingrad. Remember the fountain in COD World at War? That did such a better job at capturing the brutality of this conflict.
The infamous Lady Nightingale brought Stalingrad back from the brink. Her actions inspired the Russians to take back their city and go on the offensive. Polina changed the course of the war for the Allies and her people.
No. No one superhuman sniper motivated the entire Red Army to fight. What really motivated Soviet troops were orders such as Stalin's not one step back, with other influences including war propaganda, and a drive to defend their country and citizens from the enemy invaders. And although yes, our character's real-life counterpart, Pavlichenko, was an extremely skilled sniper who inspired her comrades in arms, and later even became a propagandaist for the Red Army, her impact on the war was not nearly as big as the game depicts, and again, she had nothing to do with Stalingrad. The next level takes place during the Battle of Tobruk, part of the North African campaign in 1941. The character who we play as in this level, Lucas, is inspired by a real soldier named Charles Upham. The problem here is that Upham was from New Zealand, and fought for the New Zealand military force, but our character in the game for some reason is from Australia, and fights in an Australian infantry division. This German tank is a Panzer IV F2, which was not produced until March 1942, making it anachronistic to feature here in 1941. We start the mission using an Owen gun, but this submachine gun was not produced until 1942. The Battle of Tobruk had a large prevalence of Italian troops, and yet we see none in this mission. We can even find a Beretta PG burst assault rifle, which was an Italian prototype weapon, but still, no Italian soldiers to be seen anywhere. We can find the German enemies using Volkssturmgewehrs, which doesn't match up as this gun did not see combat use until 1945. The German maps and documents in this level and in the rest of the game all have the symbol of the Sturmabteilung on them, but this paramilitary organisation was largely replaced by the Waffen-SS at the start of the war, making it more likely for these documents to have the SS symbol or any other such insignia on them. Major Hams appears to be wearing 1888 pattern Slade Wallace equipment for some reason. There is even bullets visible on the side of his pouches, which wouldn't fit any of the standard issued weapons during the Second World War. The following mission brings us to the Battle of El Alamein in October of 1942. It starts with all these soldiers sitting atop of these Crusader tanks. This would be unlikely, as the Crusader is a fast, lightweight tank that was made for quickly breaking through enemy lines. So soldiers would usually choose to sit atop the slower and more armoured tanks, such as the Matilda IIs or Churchills. The first RPG was put into service in 1954, and the letter stood for Ruchny Protovotankovy Granatomet, which is Russian for Handheld Anti-Tank Grenade Launcher, and then using the same acronym of RPG, it turned into Rocket Propelled Grenade. So to have the commander referring to it as an RPG in 1942 would be anachronistic. The Lee Enfields that we used at the beginning of the level only holds 5 rounds, when it should be holding 10. Here we see 8 Panzer IV F2s with the 76mm cannons, but only a very few number of these tanks actually took part in the Battle of El Alamein, with the majority of the Axis tank forces being made up of M1340 and M1441 Italian tanks, alongside short-barreled Panzer IVs and Panzer IIIs. These tanks are way too close to each other. Real tank engagements usually occurred at a much larger distance of 500 meters or so. These Australian soldiers should be wearing British Brodie helmets instead of these hats during combat. This aircraft is bombing way too close to their own troops. World War II era bombers were not that precise, so they would have to bomb hundreds of meters away from their allies to avoid friendly fire. The location where the real Battle of El Alamein happened was mostly flat desert, so there should not be mountains or old ruins here. Apparently a grenade launcher from Wolfenstein somehow slipped its way into this game. The Panzerfaust was a single-use disposable weapon, so you should not be able to reload it and use it multiple times like you can here.
The rigid hierarchy of Allied command would look at Lucas and see only character flaws.
The British commander of the 8th Army grew up in Australia, claimed that Australia was the place that inspired him to become a soldier, praised the 9th Australian Division, which is the one our character Lucas is depicted to be in, stated that they are some of the finest troops at El Alamein, and even visited the surviving veterans of the 9th after the war was over, so this really doesn't match with the discrimination against Australian soldiers that this game is showing. The final mission of this game takes place during the Battle of Berlin in May 1945.
But from the ashes shall rise our vision for something greater. To the Fourth Reich.
Throughout the whole campaign, this guy keeps going on about how he needs to get to Tempelhof Airport so he can fly away and execute Project Phoenix to bring the Reich back. But not once does the game explain how exactly he is going to achieve this impossible task this late in the war. Also, he says that Project Phoenix started 3 years ago, but Germany was still winning the war back in 1942, so why would they make a plan to resurrect themselves if their defeat was nowhere in sight? Here our character holds a pistol with 2 hands instead of 1. In World War II, soldiers were trained to hold a pistol with 1 hand, so that they could hold a knife, map, binoculars, or any other object in the other hand. Substantial sections of the subway under Berlin were purposely flooded during the real battle in the city, yet in the game we see that none of the tunnels have any water in them. Many of the German enemies are wearing modern plate carriers, which didn't exist during World War II. Tempelhof Airport was taken control by Soviet forces on April 26, 1945, but the game depicts the battlefield occurring in May. I think it goes without saying that these German flamethrower juggernaut enemies did not exist. At this point in the battle, Berlin was completely surrounded by the Red Army, so the chances of our characters not getting shot down and successfully flying out of the city in this German enemy plane would be exceptionally low.
What's Project Aggregate?
Secret V2 rocket facility. You think you could fly one of those?
I can fly anything.
No, you couldn't. The V2 rocket was an early long-range guided ballistic missile. It had no cockpit, so you couldn't pilot it.
Forged in the fires, we were the tip of the spear. We were the vanguard.
The word vanguard is defined as a group of people leading in the foremost part of an advancing army. This is exactly not what our group in the game is. They were fighting an all but defeated enemy at the very end of the war. The total number of historical inaccuracies that I was able to find was 139, but all of these details were quick things that I spotted in my first or second playthrough of the story mode. So there definitely is loads more, especially regarding the array of bizarre and cursed attachments on the guns. So if you have any more historical inaccuracies you'd like to add to the list, then please comment them below. If you enjoyed my historical analysis, then I'd highly recommend checking out this video, which explores the real life history featured in Call of Duty Black Ops 1, linked on screen now. And with that, I thank you for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing. This has been the Frosty One, over and out.